Thank you for joining today's Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting. Again, I'm Sylvia Chubrowski, helping to facilitate this process. And it has been a while since we have met together as a Rulemaking Advisory Committee. The DLCD has been busy behind the scenes and in community conversations and in other work, but this Rulemaking Advisory Committee hasn't come together as a body in a while. So really good to see you all again. And before I get into our agenda and logistics, I will just hand it over to Commissioner Lilac to provide some opening remarks.
Thank you, Sylvia, and welcome back, everyone. It has indeed been a long time, and certainly it benefited me to go back and to do some of the refresher myself to prepare for the meeting today. We really appreciate everyone's continued engagement and effort in this important rulemaking process. Today, we're pivoting from some of the concepts and draft rules focused on regional scenario planning to begin discussion of the second group of rules we will be developing to address our climate and equity goals. Our staff is going to provide an overview of the concepts or rules in 6 key areas. They'll go into a lot of detail about that. And we're going to seek your guidance today and beyond, of course, in how we collectively draft and then eventually adopt these rules. There'll be a lot of time to hear from you today, which is really important, and of course, the key element of our meeting. In addition, Cody Meyer will share the work of the Performance Measures Work Group. They've been very busy discussing various types of performance measures that will be needed to track progress toward our goals. So we do have a robust agenda, as Sylvia mentioned, a lot to start with. But before I turn it back over to Sylvia, I just have to recognize yesterday afternoon, as I was really going through the packet again and preparing for this, 2 new wildfires started here, right, just north and south of Bend in our region. And I just think it's so important that we just pause for a moment, or we just recognize the members of our community that we've lost due to the heat over just the last couple of weeks across our state, across our region. How many people are impacted today that have been evacuated, that are dealing with the smoke impacts. There's so much, and I don't mean to start with the downer, but maybe we can turn it to more of the inspiration of the important work that we're doing together to reduce human-caused climate pollution. And at the same time, a couple of weeks ago, I volunteered at one of our cooling centers, and I expect many of you may have helped in some way or another as well. And that also just helps me refocus on the importance of addressing our equity outcomes, to see the members of our community that we really need to focus on going forward. So thank you so much again for staying with us. We look forward to a great meeting today. And with that, Sylvia, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And yes, thanks. There really is devastating wildfires throughout the state, and a good reminder of the important work of this committee. So I'll share our agenda for the day and then go through some meeting logistics. So we're going to start with just kind of a review of the roadmap of the rulemaking process and the schedule, just so you can see how all the pieces align, and just a reminder of what the next few meetings are going to look like. And then we're going to really spend most of the day talking about the rule concepts, as the commissioner alluded to. So today the DLCD staff will be providing some concept presentation on 6 areas. So climate friendly areas, reducing parking mandates, limiting congestion standards, as well as developing high quality bike, pedestrian transit improvements, transportation project prioritization, and electric vehicle charging. And as you can probably tell, that's a lot of information and really a lot to try to discuss in a short period of time. So we've broken out the discussion today, where staff will do some presentation in all 6 of those areas, and then we'll do some breakout groups to talk about the 3 bulleted areas here: climate friendly areas, parking mandates, and limiting congestion standards. And then after that, we'll get some written input from you all through a Jamboard exercise. So that's kind of how we'll break up the conversation today and try to get as much input as possible. And then to wrap up the meeting, we'll move into performance measures, and Cody will provide some outcomes of the working group on that. And then we'll end with some next steps and wrap up. So that's really the agenda for today, and just some meeting reminders and logistics. Today's meeting is being recorded, just a reminder. And we also want to let you know that we have the chat open for troubleshooting and kind of webinar technology issues, but we encourage the conversation to really be in the room today rather than through the chat. And we do also public comment through writing and from the RAC members as well. And we'll put that email address into the chat in just a moment. And some reminders about just our remote participation practices. When we get into conversations and discussions, we'll just ask you to raise your hand to get in the queue. And you can find the raise hand button. It kind of changes depending on your Zoom platform, but recently, if you hover over your screen and see the reactions button at the bottom, then you'll see the raise hand button there. And if you have any trouble with that, just send a chat message to the host and we can help you. And if you're only joined by phone, you can just press *9 to get into the queue to raise your hand. And of course, just remember to leave yourself on mute when you're not speaking to reduce background noise, and please use video if possible, especially when you are in the conversation so that we can see each other. And of course, we know this is a big chunk of your day and we have like one break built in, but just stand up, walk around as you need to take care of yourself. And I think that's really all of it in terms of logistics. I think with this, I'll hand it over to Bill and Kevin to provide an overview of the roadmap and get us into our agenda for today.
Thank you, Sylvia, and welcome everyone. Welcome back and good afternoon. We're glad you could join us today to resume our work. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've been up to since our last meeting in March, and then we'll segue into kind of talking about the new stuff. So, at this point, we are pivoting in the work that we're doing together from the regional scenario planning work that kind of occupied us the first half of this session to the 6 new rule topic areas. In the meantime, since March, a lot of stuff has been done. The performance measures work group has met many times. I can't remember exactly how many times. Cody Myers has been leading that work, and he'll be talking to us a little bit later in the meeting about outcomes from that, or some suggestions that have come from that work. We've also held community conversations in all of the metropolitan areas the 7 metropolitan areas that we've been talking about. Got some good feedback and input from folks in those community conversations. Also, we put together a virtual workshop engagement opportunity for those who weren't able to attend the performance or the community conversations, or for whatever reason. This has been a really nice forum for people to learn about what we're doing and provide input. And then we also had a green infrastructure webinar. It's been a little while, but we gained some really key insights into the importance of building in green infrastructure in an urban environment in order to make sure that these climate-friendly areas we'll be talking about later and other urban areas will be, attractive, appealing, and habitable, basically. So all of that input that we've received has been folded into the rule concepts that we'll be visiting with you about a little bit later in this meeting. So next up, I want to talk through just the upcoming meeting schedule. You have a similar schedule in your packets, actually. So this is sort of a condensed version. So just to kind of step through what we're doing, and then we will be checking in with the Land Conservation and Development Commission as well, sort of as we go. So from this meeting, we're reviewing this, again, the 6 rule concepts and the performance measures. We will then provide an update to LCDC on that work and receive any potential preliminary guidance there. On August 18th, based on what we hear from you today, we will be actually providing draft rules in 3 areas. So climate-friendly areas, reducing parking mandates, and limiting congestion standards. These are the 3 areas that are probably the most complex of the 6 topics we'll be talking about, and we do expect, a lot of engagement on these topics. So we wanted to make sure that we built in sort of an iterative process So pretty much all of the meeting on August 18 will be looking at draft rules in those 3 areas and basically taking a pretty deep dive into that so that we can then get your input. We'll come back in September with revisions to those rules, which will be a short timeline for us, but we will get it done. And we'll also be bringing draft rules for the other 3 areas that we'll be talking about today. That is the high quality bike, pedestrian, and transit improvements, transportation project prioritization, and electric vehicle charging. Later in September, we'll go back to the commission, share our progress. And then at that point, we will have draft rules in all areas. And that's a good point for us to go back out for community conversations on that whole package, which we plan to do in a more condensed format during the month of October. Our last RAC meeting, if you could move to the next slide, Bill, is November 1st, or at least our last scheduled RAC meeting. So there we'll be looking at our final rules in all 6 topic areas, and then coming back with the regional scenario planning work that we developed in the first half with some revisions to Division 44. Commission will have their last kind of update on our progress before we move into the public hearing schedule. And once we get that kind of input from the commission in November, that's the point at which staff will be working on getting those rules ready to publish in time so that we can have our first hearing with the commission in January of 2022. And then a potential meeting, and this is just a placeholder at this time. So in February, based on what we hear from commission, if we feel the need to discuss that direction with the RAC again, there's a potential for another meeting in February of 2022. More information will be forthcoming on that as we know more, but it's not for certain. It's an option that we're considering. And then finally in March, we'll come back with the final public hearing and adoption of the administrative rules. So that's a packed schedule for us. We're committed to getting through on that schedule. So we'll do what we can do to get there. But we're going to be busy for the next several months. So thank you. We welcome your continued engagement. And I think from here, I turn it over to Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So unless there are any questions about the where we've been and where we're going, I'll just go ahead and move on with starting about our rules concepts. One thing I did want to point out that we wanted to highlight for you is our next commission meeting is Friday the 23rd, and we should be about 9 o'clock in the morning if folks are interested in peeking in on that commission meeting. So, and there's information on the agency's website about the agenda and how you connect with that, and we can find that for you if you're interested. So anyway, concepts for the rules. So we've got 6 kind of big buckets that's the way our commission's charge was organized: A, B, C, D, E, F, and we put together kind of a couple pages on each one. Those are in your packet in attachment. At item 4, I think it is. I have to double check, but item 4 or 5, and those kind of give the overview of the direction that we want to go with those 6 kind of concept areas. And so we'll give a little bit about each one of those today before we get into the initial discussion. So just to reiterate about, you've heard, I think Commissioner Lilac mentioned it and Kevin mentioned it both, and I'll mention it now. We're pivoting a little bit, we're changing a little bit about the kind of discussions, the subjects that we're talking about, what we've talked about before. The charge is divided into 2 main categories, and the first one is, it's a mouthful. It's requiring climate-friendly and equitable land use and transportation planning regulations. It's basically the rules that cities and counties follow in order to do transportation and planning, making those more climate-friendly and equitable. The second piece is requiring planning for climate pollution reductions in metropolitan areas. That's what scenario planning is. That's the stuff that's happening at the regional scale. That's what we've talked about quite a bit in the last few meetings before we took the break over the spring. So, but what we're going to be talking about now is that first piece that is in the charge. So that's where those 6 pieces that we're going to be talking about fit in, is in that first category of actions. So, like I said, this tells cities and counties, these rules, how to plan for land use and transportation. We have rules. It's called the transportation planning rules. If people really want to get wonky, it's Division 12 of Chapter 660 of the Oregon Administrative Rules. And we've had them for a long time. They've been in there for decades now. They've been, tweaked and amended and changed over the years, but we've told local jurisdictions, and we've worked with them to have rules about how they do coordinated land use and transportation planning. And those rules have been in this place in the state for a very long time, and we want to build on those. We want to take what we've got now. We know it's not enough, right? The results speak for themselves. We haven't met our goals. We're not meeting our targets. We need to do better in climate equity. So so we have to turn up the volume. We have to change the way we're doing some things. But it's I think we're not starting from zero either, right? We've been doing a lot of this work in the state for 20 plus 30 years. These rules, I think one key differentiation between some of the things we talked about before, which we're going to take, to do a big scenario planning process in each of the metropolitan areas takes a lot of time, takes money, it takes resources to do that. These rules are going to be implemented immediately or very soon. So maybe I'll phase in some of the elements of these depending on our conversations with local governments, but we need urgent action, and our commission has been telling us that, and we've heard that from this advisory committee as well. So we need to have some things that aren't going to take a long time that we need to start putting into place now. Now it's all relative, right? Because we're talking about planning for the future, and we're starting from where we are now. So within that big picture, we're talking about actions that we can implement as reasonably quickly as possible. And then the other piece of this is going to apply to cities and counties in metropolitan areas. The scope of the rulemaking that we're anticipating here is not going to go outside of those 8 metropolitan areas around the state. So whether the mid-sized cities that aren't in a metropolitan area, or small cities or rural areas, it's not to say that there aren't concepts or ideas in these rules that could potentially apply to those other jurisdictions down the road, and we'll probably be talking about that at some point in the future. But in terms of the scope of this rulemaking, the makeup of this advisory committee and the folks we've been talking to is really focused on those metropolitan areas for the most part. So we just want to make sure that we're not, doing something, we're not getting ahead of ourselves in terms of not talking to the right people before making those changes outside those areas. So these are the 6 areas, and I should be pretty familiar with them so far. We've mentioned them already once in this meeting, and you'll hear them a number of more times. The first one is climate-friendly areas, then high-quality pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities and networks. C is limiting off-street parking mandates. D is limiting use of motor vehicle congestion standards. E is prioritizing and selecting projects. And F is support electric vehicle charging. Now, I went through those very quickly, but we're going to spend a few minutes on each of those pieces here just after I'm done in this next couple slides. So don't worry, we'll talk a little bit more and get a little more detail about each of those. What we're going to be doing is we're going to give the overview, the staff, and there's 3 of us that have been working on different pieces of this. You'll hear from each of us. Overview of each of those concept areas, A, B, C, D, E, F. Then we'll go into a breakout room, like Sylvia mentioned earlier, to talk about those kind of 3 big ones, the ones that are we think maybe have, there's a lot of, I don't want to say concern, but a lot of, interest in those, and they may be a little bit more complicated, and there's a lot going on there. And then there's 3 that I think, it's not that they're any less important, but that maybe not as quite as much interest in terms of chasing those. So we'll be having written exercise to talk about those, and then we have the next 2 meetings. The next 2 advisory committee meetings to really dig in the details. We'll be bringing draft rules to you to say how we plan to implement those. And those draft rules are not a final, they're a draft, and we expect that there will be a back and forth and revisions of those as we move forward. There's a key question survey that will come to you after the meeting. The key questions are in your packet. I can't remember which item the number they are, but they're in your packet. And so you can see kind of the questions that we're interested in hearing about, and then you'll get that survey from Ingrid after the meeting. Just like we've had for the other meetings. Those have been a rich resource for us to be able to go back and see, hey, are we on the right track? What are the kinds of things that we need to figure out here? So we appreciate your time and effort putting into that. And you can see if you look at previous packets what your colleagues in the advisory committee have been writing in those comments. I'll say our commission also is very interested in seeing those and hearing them. So we've been making sure that the commission's had a chance to get a copy of those as well. And they've appreciated your input as well. So if you think, if you've read the things in the packet, as you've listened to us today, if you think we've gone too far, if you think we haven't gone far enough, if you think we're missing something, now is the time to let us know. And the purpose of doing this is, we're here each in our own little office, right? We're not even talking in the same office anymore. Working on these things and trying to figure out, is this kind of the right tone? Is this the right way to go? Is this the right process? Is this the right approach? We need to hear from you about, hey, you guys need to push it further, or maybe this one little thing, maybe dial it back or something like that. Or you guys are out to lunch, you need to try this totally different thing. Now, we need to work within the bounds that were given by the commission, but it's not to say that we can't do some other things that fit within the larger box, or that we can tweak some specific ways of doing things. So please let us know. There's, like I said, opportunities during this meeting, and of course after the meeting in the written comments, and you're of course welcome to send us comments outside of that survey instrument as well, via email. So I think with that, unless there's any questions about the big picture, we're going to just jump right into it. Kevin, Mary Kyle, you had a question.
Yes, thanks. And if you could, or whoever's presenting, as you go through these, could address one of the things that you mentioned in an earlier planning and regulations slide. You don't have to go to it, but you said, and the slide said that these rules will take effect immediately or very soon. And I actually had that as an overarching comment when I read through the RAC memo, that it was really hard for me to tell when things are going to take effect. And there were conflicting statements. Some were tied to a housing production strategy, some to a TSP or an RTP, it's very unclear to me when any of this will take effect. Your rules will be adopted on X date. That's not what I mean. It's when they go into effect. So as you're walking through each of these 6 areas, it would be very useful if whoever's presenting could say, this is what we're intending. Because I'm also wondering, is it all going to happen at once? Is it piecemeal? I mean, it was all very unclear to me.
Thank you. That's a good comment. I will let each of the people, including myself, who are doing these pieces of it address that, because I think it is going to be different for different pieces of it. There are pieces, like you said, that are going to be how a transportation system plan is adopted and amended. That goes along with transportation system plans. That's not going to happen immediately. There's some rules I think that will, on day one, they will be in place. So I'll just let each person kind of go through that. But it's a little bit different in each area, and frankly, we don't even know yet exactly the details of every little piece, what it's going to look like, and that's something we have to work out.
If that's to be worked on before the next iteration, that's fine. But some clearly have to be done before others. Like the first one you're going to start with, climate-friendly areas have to be defined and delineated before a lot of other stuff falls.
Absolutely, and Kevin will talk about that.
Okay, great, thanks.
All right, I'm going to give it over to Kevin now.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, and to the scheduling question, I think in part that we expect there to be some different opinions about when some of these things should come into play. So what we wanted to do first with the RAC was to have a conversation at the concept level and to get some preliminary feedback from you. But what I can say about climate-friendly areas is the way we're thinking about implementing this is to basically establish deadlines for local governments to designate climate-friendly areas. What that timeline is like, it may vary by size of city. Typically the larger cities will have more resources and staffing, so they may be able to do that more quickly, although oftentimes they have more complex codes and that sort of thing. So to be determined, but we are very aware that we need to move as quickly as we possibly can on the climate issue. And so you will see dates in the draft rule that come out for our next meeting. And then, but I would welcome input from all of our RAC members about, those kind of questions. So Bill, go ahead and advance to the next slide if you would. All right, so first of all, just a refresher, what is a climate-friendly area? So climate-friendly areas are urban mixed-use areas that contain that, and as we're thinking about this, they either currently contain or will be planned to contain these elements. So a mixture of housing, jobs, businesses, and services, high-quality pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities, affordable housing, a mix of employment opportunities, abundant tree canopy, vegetation, shading, weather protection, make sure that these are comfortable in inviting urban environments. And overarching all of this is the opportunity to meet most daily needs without a car. That is a fundamental goal of a climate-friendly area. That is why they're so important to our climate pollution effort, is that they, if done correctly, will allow people to live in ways where they're not dependent on a single occupant vehicle, to have a lot of different opportunities for ways to get around and get their needs met over the course of a day. So that's the concept. Next slide, please, Bill. So to make sure that we achieve these goals, the climate-friendly areas will need to meet certain requirements in order to achieve equity and climate pollution reduction goals. So in terms of the different areas of rules, as I mentioned, deadlines for cities to designate climate-friendly areas. Also, as part of that process of designation of climate-friendly areas, we want to make sure that we build in a process for local governments to consider and address potential displacement of priority populations, other negative impacts that may occur, and to proactively implement programs to counteract those potential impacts. So that's a complex piece. We're trying to kind of build that into the model here. And then a couple more on the next slide. So development standards are going to be critical. So development standards for these climate-friendly areas to ensure that that development will achieve climate pollution reduction goals. So we need that mixture of uses. We need a relatively intensive urban environment so that things are close enough together that you can get there by walking, by biking, by transit, all of those other modes. And then lastly, we recognize that we haven't been seeing this level of development in the past. We need to shift the market to a degree. And so as part of that, we're looking to build in a process for local governments to develop and implement strategies and incentives for desired development in climate-friendly areas. So in the packet, in the analysis here, we talk a little bit about the use of housing production strategies as a tool. So that's a relatively recent requirement that came about from passage of House Bill 2003. And that's one tool that we're considering using to basically establish a focus on development within climate-friendly areas to try to track our progress towards our goals and allow local governments to make adjustments and look at different tools in the toolbox to achieve the level of development we're looking for. So that's climate-friendly areas in a nutshell. We'll have some time for question and answer once we're done with all 6 areas.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So I'm going to talk a little bit about item B here, the high quality pedestrian, bicycle, and transit. And one thing I did want to note for folks that may be following along in your packet, there's the 6 sections, and at the top of each of those sections, there's a paragraph that's in a box. That box, that text comes straight from the charge that came from the commission. So that's what came from the commission, and then we're basing, the rest of that, those couple pages for each of those is really how do we support and accomplish what that charge is asking us to do. So I just want to make that clarification real quick. So I'm going to talk real quick about high quality pedestrian and bicycle and transit infrastructure planning. What we're planning to do here is really build on existing requirements that are in the transportation planning rules and have been there for a long time. And like I said, we want to enhance them. We want to turn up the volume. We want to get to them to a point where what local governments are doing is the level necessary to meet our climate equity goals. Just to go back to the timing piece of this a little bit, there are going to be elements of this that will take effect immediately, as I assume them. That mostly has to do with how local land use codes, kind of connect to the transportation network, site design things like that. There's a lot in the existing transportation planning rules. It's been there for decades about that. And not necessarily every jurisdiction has codes that are up to date with that. But we're going to try to write these rules in a way that makes it very clear what local governments need to do, and that local governments are held to account in order. They don't necessarily have to have a code that's up to date in order to follow the rules. The rules have to be followed anyway. And so we're going to try very clear about that. And I know that sounds scary from maybe a city planner's perspective. I'm thinking about it as, I'm a former county planner in this state, and as a county planner, and this may be a little bit wonky for non-planning folks out there to understand, but for a long time, we didn't even look at our own county code. When I was looking to see what would happen in a farm or a forest zone, I would just open up the administrative rules, because that's our rules weren't up to date. We knew we had to follow the state rules, and so that's what we followed. We didn't have a local code, and I think cities maybe haven't necessarily had that issue so much over time. That I think we're going to have to go that way in order to get the speed of some of these things. And it may be that, and I imagine there's some local government folks on the call right now that are getting alarmed by that, but that's probably what some of these things are going to be. And there's going to be some places where you're already meeting these, or maybe you're exceeding the standards that we'll put in the state administrative rules. And in that case, that's great. But those are some things that will happen immediately. Some things that are going to be happening in this section are going to not happen immediately. Those are things mostly having to do with investments and how, and this is really connected with the prioritization element. Those two are there's some gray areas between those two, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But how local governments make decisions about where they make their investments, and which systems receive investments, and which systems don't, and which systems, we know that we don't have a complete pedestrian network. You can't get from here to there, at least safely, right? Maybe walk in a ditch in some places, but in a lot of places we got sidewalks, but in a lot of places we don't. Same definitely goes to the bicycle network, and certainly goes to the transit network, right? We don't have complete safe networks for those modes in most places right now. And so we're going to focus on that, because when it comes to our street and highway network, we have a mature network. We've put a lot of investment. We've done a great job. You can drive from here to there, and maybe there's some congestion sometimes, but it's there. It's complete. There's some places where we're building out new areas where you need to build some new facilities, but for the most part, places that are built out already have a mature street and highway network. So focusing on those networks that are incomplete and don't yet have that mature level of development, and making sure that we're investing in those correctly. That's going to happen over time. That's going to happen as local governments update their local transportation system plans. It's not going to happen overnight. So, but really, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the prioritization piece of it. When it comes to, we'd like to have everywhere to have great networks, right? We'd like to have across all the cities within metropolitan areas, but we need to be able to prioritize. We need to be able to focus, and we're going to be focusing our standards and later I'll talk about the prioritization on our climate-friendly areas where we expect high levels of development of compact mixed-use development patterns to be happening, where we expect people to be able to walk, ride a bike, or take transit safely and easily in those areas. We're going to focus on investments in neighborhoods with concentrations of priority populations, make sure that places where there's been years or decades of underinvestment, that we're making proper investments in those areas, that we're trying to ameliorate places where maybe there's been malinvestment, we can make an investment in a neighborhood. It's not necessarily good for the neighborhood, right? So we want to make sure that we're addressing those. And then also we want to make sure that we are providing access to key destinations. And key destinations is pretty much anything you can think of, right? It's places people need to go every day. It's maybe the stores, it's medical, it's schools, it's workplaces. All those sorts of places we need to be able to have easy access for a range of modes of travel to get there. So that's really what this piece is about, is really making sure that we have mature, complete, safe pedestrian, bicycle, and transit networks for everybody to access a range of destinations. And I'll go ahead and I think the next one is parking, and I'll hand that over to Evan.
Thanks. And as you do that, just a quick time check for staff. I know we have 4 more areas to get through and a lot of discussion. So much information. Keep going.
Thanks, Sylvia. Evan Manville, I'm a staffer here, he, him pronouns. So part of the commission's charge was to catch up with the rest of the world in reforming parking management. Really, cities across the world, including oil capital of Canada, Edmonton, and New Zealand, and here in Oregon, et cetera, are scaling back costly parking mandates. So we wouldn't be alone in doing that. Cities are doing that for lots of reasons. Up here in the red is a map of a downtown. This is Corvallis, but it's pretty much any downtown in Oregon. All the red is parking off street. So it uses a huge amount of land. The amount of our city land that's devoted to parking is somewhere between 10% and 20%, about 10% on street and another up to 10% off street. So this is a huge land use, and being efficient about it makes sense. And cities are coming to realize this. It's a big cost for business owners. Commercial development, it's more than half of the average land use for commercial development. So if we can right size it, that will save businesses and help them. And then when we look at how much it's used, these are studies of multifamily or affordable multifamily developments. There's a lot that's wasted. This one size fits all parking thing that we've had in our code, it's often overshooting and not meeting the variation and the diversity of the development. And finally, it's causing people to drive more, mandating a bunch of parking. The recent academic studies are showing people own more cars and they drive more when there's more parking available. And that's basic economics. If you're providing a bunch of stuff for free and a lot of it, people will consume more of it. But we now have the data to back that up. So lots of reasons for reform. Again, we can use land for parking or we can use it for housing. And parking takes up a bunch of land if we need to build off-street parking. So we need to be really careful about that. This is a study of from some students in Eugene that said, hey, if we can build 3 parking spaces for 4 units instead of 1 per unit, we can build 4 units instead of 2 units. So again, it's a trade-off that has been happening over time that is kind of invisible. We've been choosing storing our cars instead of building housing. So it's an important piece of this puzzle. Now, beyond just what the regulations and how much required parking there is, if we can price parking and actually make people who are consuming the good of parking pay for it, they will consume a lot less. Whether it's their commute to work, whether they have to pay to park at work, or choosing a housing situation. If they actually get a benefit from consuming less car and less driving, they will do that less. And that's, again, a basic economic concept, but we have the data to show that. So if we're actually going to meet our pollution goals, pollution reduction goals, and our equity goals, we've got a lot of reason to reform parking. Okay, so that was my hour-long speech in 3 minutes. What are we hoping to do? Reduce parking mandates. That makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. Internalize the costs. Think about how parking lots are designed to make sure that people walking around them aren't harmed. Try not to, in our climate-friendly areas and other places, build huge car-focused development. And use parking management. There are lots of things we can do besides just building more parking to make sure people do have a place to park their cars. Permits, pricing, signals, signage, all sorts of things that cities are now using as they're realizing that's the cheaper and better way to do it. Our rules say, our rule concept is saying there are certain types of development we want more of. So we should particularly reduce mandates for those. And there are particular places that we really want to make sure aren't car focused. And if we can reduce the mandates and the red tape around development in those areas, let's do that, including parking. We obviously want to have cities to have options to improve parking management because each city is different, each place is different. And ask more from larger cities. As far as timing on this, some of this where the cities will have the choice, various choices, we obviously need to give them time to do that, to consider their choices. Other things, if we're saying, hey, multifamily development overall, that's a type of development, you can't require more, that might happen immediately. So there's some nuances there and some details. I'm happy to talk to people offline about that. Two last points about parking. Always confusing for people. If parking is not required, it will still get built. So all the data show that, all the experience, 3 decades, 4 decades of experience, the market requires it, lenders require it. It will get built, but it will vary from development to development. And the last point, cities may end up having to manage on-street parking better. And that's about 10% of their land. But if there is spillover parking, which is people from a certain development don't have enough off-street, so they park on street, and that impacts the neighbors, that on-street parking may need to be managed by cities. So we're aware of that, but we think that's a benefit. We think that increases efficiency and will eventually mean that people have the parking they need, and we don't have a lot of wasted excess parking. That's the parking overview. I will pass it on.
Thank you, Evan. So I am next for D, limiting use of motor vehicle congestion standards. This one might get a little bit wonky. I'm going to try to de-wonkify it to the extent possible, but we'll see. There may be questions about this. So sometimes you'll hear these called mobility standards. We're calling them, the big thing we're calling transportation system performance standards. Sometimes you hear called mobility standards. Those mobility standards, almost entirely the ones you hear about, have to do with motor vehicle congestion. They're usually called either level of service, you might see LOS, and sometimes they're a letter grade, A, B, C, D, I think E, F, so if it's F, you're doing really bad and there's people are stuck in traffic, and if it's A, people will just drive through, no problem. And then the other one's called VC ratio, or volume to capacity ratio, and that's basically a number between 0 and 1. So it's expressed as a point in hundredths of hundredths. It's a 0.75. A VC ratio is getting pretty busy. A 0 is like there's no one on the road, and 1 means it's full. Based on what they think, what the traffic engineers think a street, its theoretical capacity is. So 1 is totally full, and anyway, I'll move on with that. These measures measure vehicle throughput and congestion. That's what they're for. That they don't talk about pedestrians, except to the extent that pedestrian signal phases might block traffic from going through at a certain rate. They don't talk about bicycles. They don't talk about transit, except that maybe buses are stuck in the same traffic as everyone else. They don't talk about those things. They don't talk about people movement. They don't talk about access to destinations. They don't talk about network connectivity. It ignores all those values. They're really just to say, can we move enough vehicles through the certain intersection or the segment of street at a certain rate? That's what those standards are about. Where we use these standards, there are 4 different main places that I found identified, and I will say that I'm borrowing liberally from some work that Metro has done up in the Metro area. They're looking at some of these same questions around mobility standards and transportation system performance standards, and maybe looking at some different things up in that area. So I've borrowed from them. Making transportation plans, as local governments make transportation system plans, they use a variety of measures, but these standards are a key one, especially when they start plugging into models to figure out where different traffic is going to go and things like that, and what places look red on the map, which means maybe they need to get more lanes or something like that. Those measures are used in that case. The second one is a big one. If you are you plugged into this world a little bit, it's regulating plan amendments and zone changes. And I do want to spend just a second here to talk about how this works, because it's a little bit confusing for maybe people who aren't plugged into how this works on a day-to-day basis. So the Oregon planning system is designed, one of the original conceits of it is that you do the planning up front, right? You do all your comprehensive planning, you do all the park planning, you do all the housing planning, you do all the transportation planning up front. And then whatever's in your plan, whatever's allowed by that plan under the zoning and the comprehensive plan designations, you can build it. You've done the planning up front, it's ready to go, it's set up for, it's got, you're going to have the infrastructure there for that stuff. That's how the system is built. And that's basically at the state level, how we have our rules written is that we assume that you can just build whatever you want. And that's, you do your transportation system plan and then you're good. What happens is under the state system is people then want to make changes after they've done the transportation system plan, which means it's a coordinated plan with the land use plan. They want to go make changes to the land use plan, make changes to the comprehensive plan designation, or to make a zone change. In that case, we have a process in the transportation planning rules that says, okay, you have to go back and make sure that whatever you're doing isn't going to significantly affect the transportation system in a certain way. And if it does, then you have to fix it. Makes sense. All of how that has been done over the years is just by the practice of it. It's not necessarily written super in, I mean, it's written a little bit in the rules, but it's not hard in the rules, and we're going to make it very clear the rules that it doesn't have to be this way, is that people use those vehicle congestion standards to the and nothing else really to make those determinations whether or not there's a significant effect on the transportation system, and then what you have to do in order to fix it. And we'll say, don't use these standards, use something else. The third one is review of development proposals. This is something that the state hasn't regulated. This really is how local governments have decided to make decisions about how development proposals are reviewed at the local government level. And I think we're going to put some sideboards on that and how these standards can be used in that context. And then the fourth one is implementation and operation of transportation systems. And I think I'm still trying to figure out exactly how, if we're going to have a hand in that or not, and what sideboards we might put on that for that. So our rules are going to require using other transportation performance standards. Like I said, ones having to do with maybe network connectivity, ones that say you have to move toward a reduction of per capita vehicle miles traveled, which is the direction we need to go. It's what direction California has gone recently for some of these things. For safety, equity, there's all sorts of different concepts out there. The question is, how do you then make it into a transportation system performance standard? And so I think we're still trying to figure some of those things out. Where I think we'll limit the applications for congestion-based standards. And then here's some examples of other standards that we could potentially use. So that's limiting use of motor vehicle congestion standards. I feel like I went through a very wonky talk a bit very fast. I think we're still probably behind time. So I'm going to go ahead and press on to prioritizing and selecting projects. And this is something where I've alluded to quite a bit of this, I think, before when I was talking about pedestrian, bicycle, and transit. We need transportation system plans to do a better job of prioritizing their transportation investments. Right now, local plans often do have prioritized lists. They might have tiers of projects, something like that, where they have, this is the top 10% of projects we want to do, or this is A, B, and C, they'll do these first. Different plans do it differently. We're going to be pretty clear, I think, in the rules about how we expect that to happen, how we expect the prioritization to work, and that we want that prioritization to be based on particular things that I think our values are important, including that modal priority, pedestrian, bicycle, and transit first before you do other things. That we're making sure that we're making the right kinds of investments and good investments in neighborhoods with concentrations of priority populations in order to work on fixing some of the errors of the past, focusing in climate-friendly areas on making investments to make those work, and then ensuring, again, access to key destinations with those prioritizations. And then the final piece is we would then constrain that with have a financially constrained list of projects based on the resources that would be available over that planning period of that local transportation system plan. Right now, this is going to be familiar to transportation planners, that term financially constrained. That's something that regional transportation plans have to do under federal law. Our rules right now do not require that to happen at local plan level. And we're talking about doing this just so that we know these are the projects that we expect to be able to do, and that we'll have that list that we can rely on for a variety of reasons in our plan over that planning period. And those are the ones we're going to focus on. We're not going to be able to jump the list to go down to a bottom priority thing before we do these top ones, because the ones at the top are the only ones that are going to be in the plan. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Evan to finish us off here.
Thank you. Can you pull up that? Yeah, perfect. So really briefly, supporting electric vehicle charging. We are at a place in development where people don't want to buy electric vehicles because they're not sure they'll have a place to charge them. And people don't want to install chargers because people don't own electric vehicles. So that is a problem. The legislature this session passed something called House Bill 2180, having a building codes division install ability to get 20% of spaces in new multifamily and commercial to have chargers. We would follow along with that, with our pieces of that in parking lots. So we realize that 85 to 90% of charging in EVs happens at home. So that's a real key piece of the thing. Once we nudge the market, we're hoping to really see cleaner vehicles follow those trend lines that the optimists are hoping for. We realize this isn't a one size fits. This isn't a silver bullet that will fix everything. We've heard that a lot in community conversations and skepticism that this isn't all of the solution, but it is a piece of meeting our climate pollution reduction goals. We are also thinking about, for the largest communities, doing some on major renovation or remodel to meet those standards and installing those charging stations. They are expensive to install, so doing it at the time of development is the cheapest way to do it by far. The retrofits are expensive. We've also heard that thinking a little bit about e-bikes and other micromobility things that might need charging is an important part of our rules. So that's where we are on that.
Great, thank you so much, DLCD team. That's a lot of information, 6 really complex topic areas. So we want to open it up to kind of clarifying Q&A with the group here. We know there might be a lot of questions, but maybe if there are some higher level questions that everyone could benefit from hearing the responses to, and if you have more detailed technical questions, kind of saving those for offline to discuss with DLCD staff through email or something like that, just so we can have enough time for discussion here would be great. But just go ahead and kind of raise your hand if you have any clarifying questions before we get into a discussion on this topic. No clarifying questions. I can't believe that. All right, let's see. Well, let's go to Emma first, because we heard from Emma and then Mary Kyle and Rebecca. Go ahead, Emma.
Thank you. So climate-friendly areas seem to be a key piece of all of this. And so I'm curious, I saw the definition slides, that was helpful. It's starting to paint the picture a little bit more closely, but I'm curious if they will be changing over time. And I don't want to jump too far forward in the meeting, but looking at some of the performance measures, it seems like if climate-friendly areas are being established now, but then if they might evolve over time, that may have some ripple effects throughout both the rule concepts and the performance measures discussion that we need to think through.
My question,
So are they static or are they dynamic?
if it's efficient for me to tack on to Emma's, mine's also about the climate friendly, or I can let you answer that one first.
Well, I'll just be really brief. No, I don't. If the question is, will the standards for climate-friendly areas evolve over time? No, we're not thinking that would be the case. Obviously, if we get to closer to 2035 and we're not meeting our goals, yeah, maybe. But the key distinction is that some areas currently are probably meeting all of what we would establish as here's the base level requirements for climate-friendly area. There are other areas that currently don't meet those standards in terms of like building entitlements and mixture allowed uses and that sort of thing. And so it would be a zone to allow kind of situation. And asking those local governments to identify those areas where the plan is to really foster that type of development in the future. It may not exist today. In some areas, it may exist.
So could a local government change the designated areas over time? And is a climate-friendly area the same definition, like regardless of size of jurisdiction across the state, or does a climate-friendly area, as intended to be written, look differently in a smaller community compared to a larger community? I'm thinking, City of Coburg is in our MPO, and yet City of Coburg is very different from downtown Eugene.
I think we're open to input on that topic, because we recognize, cities have different scale and different levels of development.
Yeah, thanks. And Rebecca, was your question along those lines, or?
It was. I was also curious about, you sort of answered it with local governments are the ones designating these things. A couple of my questions were around the criteria. There's a long list of criteria. And so one of my questions is, does the area have to meet all of those criteria? Or does it, is there a specialization in one thing over the other? Because depending on how the thresholds are set and how things are interpreted, I could see this going lots of different directions. And I think that kind of gets to the geographic variation as well. So one of my questions was about designation. Other question is about who's reviewing them and whether there's changes over time. The reason I have a lot of questions about this is because I've done a lot of work on the spatial targeting in Maryland and the designation of priority funding areas, which came with a whole bunch of different criteria. And so I have a lot of lessons to share about how that process worked with letting local governments specify. And so I'm happy to talk more about that, but I think it's really important to get this right and to be really clear about how it gets set.
First of all, we'd welcome your input. Any research you've done elsewhere on areas where this has been attempted, you'd be very interested. I think basically we're looking to establish a baseline of standards that would be adopted by the local government that would qualify as a climate-friendly area. Could that vary within Oregon? At this time, we're thinking probably not, because we need this critical mass of activity, jobs, housing, and all of that in order to make this work. And again, to underscore that, the critical thing we're trying to get is an environment where people can function most of the time, meeting most of their needs without need of a motor vehicle, or I should say a single occupant vehicle. A lot of questions, sorry.
Thank you. And Margie, was your question on the same topic? Why don't you go ahead and then we'll circle back.
You're muted.
I unmuted and then put my hand down, so excuse me. So good afternoon, everyone. Margie Broadway from Metro. And my comment was similar on the climate communities. In the metropolitan region, we have seen an advantage of defining center corridors at a regional level. It allows an ebb and flow, and there's bigger centers and there's smaller centers. In fact, we believe in that process so much that I would say Metro would specifically ask if DLCD, at least for the Portland metro area, to have a regional definition that applies regionally for us. And that also allows us to do modeling and performance measures on a regional level, which the cities and counties already rely on Metro to do that at a regional level. I'm happy to talk with the LCD staff after this meeting on how we would suggest going forward with that.
We'd welcome that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie. And Mary Kyle.
It's on the same topic. And I think maybe having a subgroup after this would be great to actually define climate-friendly areas, because it seems that it's kind of vague elements now, and I think it'd be critical to define it. And I think a lot of communities already have places like these designated in their plans that have similar names. They're special transportation areas. They're all of the design areas that Margie referred to in the metro area. They're, neighborhood centers, et cetera, that have many or most of these elements. And I do think it's going to vary according to size of the city. Some things might not vary, like pedestrian friendly design. It should kind of look the same regardless of the scale of the area, but the level of density is going to be different. So I think it's really critical to get this definition and let cities start delineating these right away. I don't think it'll be that challenging. I'm not a local planner, so feel free to disagree with me, local planners, but I do think there's a lot of these, a really good start in existing plans. And I think we're fumbling around because this right now, because there isn't a clear definition and a sign that says go, start delineating these, because so much else in what we're talking about falls from the definition and the delineation. And I think that's a really critical first step to take.
All right, thanks, Mary Kyle. And we will have, time for conversation on climate-friendly areas in our breakout rooms. And I think maybe that's a place where if people have some of that input on the definition, that would be welcome there as well. And of course, offline. And yes, Rob, I know, I see your hand. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I'm Rob Innerfeld, Transportation Planning Manager with the City of Eugene. I'm sorry, I had to join the meeting late, so I missed this part of the presentation. So I apologize if I'm asking about something you already talked about. I agree with what Mary Kyle said, but even more to that point, I feel like this is still really conceptual and that we don't really have much to react to here. Like, are you going to give us a definition of like this, like a floor, like unless you're doing this, it's not a climate friendly area? Are we going to get to that level of detail at some point?
Because that's our thinking. And let me just say, this is conceptual on purpose, because we're saying these are areas where we're looking for input. So what is the bottom line for a climate friendly area? We're looking for that level of feedback from our records.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. So with that, I just want to maybe get us into our breakout rooms and a little bit of intro there. So we're going to get into breakout rooms, and like folks said, we'll be focusing on 3 topics: the climate-friendly areas, reduced parking mandates, and if you go to the next slide, reduced parking mandates and limit use of congestion standards. So there are several questions for each of these pieces. And in our breakout rooms, just like to be able to hear from everybody and to deal with kind of time management, we're going to suggest that we kind of go around the breakout room once to have everybody give 1 or 2 minutes of input on the climate friendly areas questions that are up here, and then go around the breakout room one more time for about 20 minutes to hear on reduced parking mandates and limited use of congestion standards together. So the questions that we have for the breakout rooms for climate-friendly areas, and realizing there's been a number of comments already on this, on the need for a definition. So I think that kind of input is welcome, but also just thinking about what kind of development standards are needed to ensure successful climate-friendly areas. So what would you suggest in terms of those criteria? And then do you have any suggestions for how to amend the housing production strategy requirements to address residential development in these climate-friendly areas? Or are there other incentives that could be considered to encourage development in climate-friendly areas? And then in terms of reduced parking mandates, we're asking you to reflect on, whether the overall approach to parking mandate reform seems to be on the right or wrong track, and any key types of development or places where parking mandates should be particularly scaled back from your perspective. And then lastly, on limiting use of congestion standards, also, again, reflecting on the presentation you heard today and on what was in the packet, what do you think is the right balance of using these kind of transportation system performance standards that are focused on motor vehicle congestion versus other kinds of outcomes like Bill talked about, bike, ped, transit, those kinds of other kinds of modes of getting around. So that was the breakout questions in a nutshell. And when we get into our breakout rooms, let's see, looking at time here, I think we can focus on the climate friendly area questions until about 2:25, discussion leaders, and then parking and congestion standards ending at about 2:50. So those are your kind of time markers, 2:25 and 2:50. And in your breakout rooms, you'll be asked to select someone to report out. So just be ready to come back with really a 1 minute high level report out. It doesn't have to be a summary, but just 1 or 2 interesting things that came out of the conversation. And we're going to be kind of assigned into random breakout rooms here. And Ingrid will be staying in the plenary session to help anyone that gets lost or doesn't get assigned, she'll make sure that you get into a breakout room. And breakout room discussion leaders, you know who you are. So any questions before we jump into those on logistics? All right, then Ingrid, do your magic and get us into our breakout rooms. See you all back at around 2:50. Okay, welcome back. Trying to see if we have everyone back. I think we do. All right. Well, hopefully you all had some good discussions in your breakout rooms. I know we had a very rich discussion in our room here. So we'll move into some report outs and really just, 1 minute high level, some key ideas that came out in your group. You don't have to try to synthesize the whole thing. It's a hard thing to do with such rich conversation. So we'll go first to room 1, which was actually my breakout room. And we have Sarah reporting out from that room. And then we'll go to room 2, which was Cody's room. And then room 3, which was, I know Casaria was in that room and Matt Kroll. But first to Sarah. And feel free to introduce yourself as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Sarah Adams Shane. I'm a REC member, and I'm a professor at University of Oregon in the School of Law. I teach land use and state and local government law. I do a lot of my work with relation to fair and equitable housing and climate change. So I'm so daunted by this 1 minute guideline. I'm going to spend the whole minute worrying about it. There were so many valuable comments, so you can look through them on the screen here. Those are Kevin's notes there. Comments about, I'm just going to highlight a couple. So, comments about streamlining and removing regulatory barriers and really looking at what are the regulatory preferences, flipping the script from the preference for single family to the preference for density, but also a concern about affordability. And so how can that be, incentivized, or I might, or even mandated. And there were some examples given of places to look for ways that that's being done, including some within the state. A real need to look at, livability, accessibility, and affordability. There was comment, from AARP about that, but also comments about how these areas are going to overlap with areas where there's higher densities of historically marginalized peoples that could be low amenity and become even potentially more low amenity with respect to permeable land and shade and trees and vegetation, making them less livable and less habitable, especially in a hotter world. So, there was here and below, there was some discussion about, appreciation for relating housing capacity analysis and housing production strategy. And I brought up kind of this maybe really amorphous concept of is there an opportunity here, given the equity and justice charge to build climate justice considerations into planning and decision making, identifying areas with low amenity, such as trees and higher concentrations of poverty or historically marginalized people. As we move forward, and there was a question kind of at the end about methodology and the potential for using, GIS to achieve some of that. There was quite a bit of agreement with the approach on parking and congestion, but some really insightful comments about, potential unintended consequences and some need for congestion data, and also potential unintended consequences around lack of off-street parking, such as people parking too much on alleys and small streets and limiting emergency access. And something I thought about as we were all talking about that is considering, especially for some of the smaller communities, wildfire escape routes. There was some mention of reducing parking minimums through bonuses for play spaces and trees, but generally quite a bit of support. And then with the last question too, there was quite a bit of discussion about integrating with ODOT, making sure that ODOT metrics were consistent with what's coming out of this. ODOT also, their ODOT representative was present, and that seems to be going on. Some talk about MMA being a default instead of requiring an application. And I'll just stop there.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really captured a rich discussion. Let's go to room 2, and that was Cody Meyer's room.
Yeah, Alex is going to report out for us. And thank you, Bianca, for pulling up the notes.
Hi, everyone. This is Alex Fan. I'm the new primary for Oregon Realtors. I'm a real estate broker in the Portland metro area. And yeah, I was, as Sarah mentioned, I'm just trying to compress this all in. We talked about kind of some expansion of, well, I guess the biggest takeaway is like there has to be a lot of nuances to every role we take to make sure there aren't those unintended consequences or unintended costs. We could be accelerating costs for some of the things that we plan to do. One of the things, I'm just going to go into the notes here. We talked about, what is the definition of how big a climate friendly area could look like? Where are the priority communities? What kind of understanding? I talked about apartment buildings, EV charging. This is kind of going ahead, but if we reduce parking structure, we could also be then reducing EV charging requirements and other things like that. In general, I feel like we talked about parking. We feel like it was on the right track with things. Sorry, I jumped ahead there, but let's see. We talked about, multifamily apartments going up with no parking requirements. So really making sure that there are alternative modes of transportation. We talked about how there's parking is being utilized also by houseless communities as well. So making sure there aren't unintended consequences to those communities that, could be harmed by that. ADA standards, things like that. Let's see. I think that's pretty much for parking. You guys can go through the notes. And congestion standards, just really, I don't think there was a really good way for us to figure out how we measure it. I know somebody brought up the air quality index, and talking about one great example was Oriana brought up that, the Cully neighborhood is a high traffic diesel area. Those communities are really impacted by all of that extra air quality in their neighborhoods. So looking at how we can measure those and for these communities, basically.
That's great.
Thank
you, Alex. Appreciate that. So great. And then let's go to room 3 that was led by Matt Krull, and then we'll go to room 4 that was led by Bill. And do we have someone to report out from Matt's group, number 3?
Yeah, I'm going to do it for group number 3. This is Commissioner Warren. So I'm going to kind of focus on the 30,000 foot ideas that I heard in our meeting or group. So the first is the need for flexible standards to allow cities to do what works best for them, but also to have a baseline requirement for densities, which I thought was a really great conversation. And then also heard that we probably need to be looking at zoning that requires mixed use. That also includes affordability. Instead of just allowing for it, it's probably more important to start requiring a baseline. And then there was general agreement that we need to reduce parking mandates, but need to keep in mind how freight can be delivered in those spaces. And need to consider that congestion standards are what we use to trigger transportation improvement projects, especially those projects that we're looking for moving forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, over to room 4, Bill's group.
Yeah, Chelsea is going to be our speaker for us today. Thank you, Chelsea.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea from City of Eugene, Sustainability Manager there. I think on the whole, our group had a few planning professionals, so certainly want to recognize them, but I think a lot of us had less expertise in this area, which just gives us a different kind of expertise, meaning we'd have less planning expertise and more kind of general lived experience. So for the first piece, there was lots of reference to sort of middle housing work happening right now across the state. So good to keep in mind, and just the intersection of this work with that. And then in general, in a lot of different ways, there's this tension that popped up between kind of wanting the state to say, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and taking away some of that ambiguity at the local level, or the ability for neighbors or others to come out at the last minute and say, no, you can't build that multifamily project because it's too high, or there's not enough parking or whatever. And like wanting that to lean on to make things go more quickly, with the tension of also like, but we want to listen to our local community. In particular, I think in Eugene, for example, we're hearing a ton from our environmental justice community, and that hasn't always been the case. So how do we like balance this need of like wanting to incorporate that feedback, but also recognizing it often does really slow things down. And then another comment that I thought was interesting was, how do we get particularly our public institutions built within these sort of climate friendly areas or what have you, and not on the outskirts of town. So schools and libraries were a few examples brought up. And then moving on to this congestion question and parking question, safety came up as a pretty big concern that needed to be thought more about within this context, particularly around congestion. What are the safety concerns when we add congestion? And then also safety came up in terms of like, as we build more infrastructure, what are the things we should be thinking about with the interface of pedestrians and bicycles? Like think of like a dedicated bicycle lane and how pedestrians interact with that. And then just in general around the two topics, like the general idea is to discourage driving, or that's kind of the feeling that we had. But often there's not the tools in place when we put these mechanisms into place for people to use in lieu of driving. So I thought like a really visceral example that someone in our group gave was when the alternative to driving is sitting at a bus stop for 2.5 hours in the middle of the night alone. That's not a real alternative. So how do we, this isn't really a chicken and the egg type of situation. We know what we need to do first. We need to build the tools for people to use, particularly in our most vulnerable communities, before we take away that driving option.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea. And last group is Evan's group, room 5.
Yeah, Paige volunteered to report out. Thanks, Paige.
Yep. So Paige West, Rogue Valley Transit, senior planner. We touched on a lot of things that have already been talked about, but just a couple that haven't been yet. So when we discussed the climate friendly areas concept, I think a lot of us started thinking about areas in our communities that have those facilities and are very multimodal, but they're also what we have seen are affluent and gated communities, areas that a lot of the marginalized communities that we've been talking about really can't afford to live in those areas, when we really are looking at the mechanisms and the pieces and parts of what you're defining, that DLCD is defining as a climate friendly area. And we're looking around today. I think there was a big concern that those are areas that are not reachable financially for the populations that we're talking about. And so if we're going to be investing in climate friendly areas, how can we make sure that we're putting public dollars in the areas that need the help, and not necessarily in the areas that are already being built in the right way that don't need the help? So that was a big part of our discussion. And then also making sure that in those areas that are climate friendly, and there's the disincentives, for example, of not having parking, that we're not burdening low-income persons who may still need their car for work or other things. So not disincentivizing it so specifically that it ends up making it a burden for the people that we're trying to really help. We also talked about the congestion standard, and the way it's coming across right now is that DLCD would really just be lifting a standard and there's really nothing that would take the place of it. So, for example, a multimodal level of service that forecasts out the required bicycle and pedestrian requirements. For example, making sure that the sidewalks are 15 feet wide, that there's an adequate bicycle boulevard or facility, that there's plazas, that there's, shade at all the different components, to be able to say, okay, well, if you're not going to build for cars, you need to build for other modes, transit, bike, ped, but it's not specific, not in this work or also at the local level, in any TSP or Metro might have a little bit of that work going on, but I think that there's a big lift for us to be able to identify what then do we build if we're not going to build more for cars. I think cities are asking for that direction and needing some further definition on that. And then lastly, with the parking, I think that the general sense is that you're really on the right track and that there's a lot of work that's been done on that standardization and looking at maximums and ways to manage parking better. I think that we agreed with a lot of what was presented on that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Paige. And thanks everyone. Really valuable to hear the conversations that were had in those breakouts. And so at our next Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting, you will get a chance to kind of see some of the draft rules for these 3 topics. So really looking forward to that conversation too. But we're not done with these 6 topic areas. We've only done 3 of them. So now we have 3 more to talk about. And just in the interest of time, we're going to do this next piece through a Jamboard, which we've done before with this group. And Bianca just put a link into the chat. And I'll provide instructions for what we're doing here, but we have 3 more rule areas to talk about. And Bianca, if you'll go ahead and share your screen. So folks, you don't quite have to follow that link yet, but you can if you want, and I'll just describe what we're doing here. So there's a number of boards on this Jamboard, and they have questions for the 3 topic areas that we're going to.
Sylvia's frozen. Bianca, are you available?
Yes, I am available, although Sylvia isn't frozen for me. I mean, I think Sylvia, you're back. Is that?
I can hear everything. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm getting thumbs up. So it might be on your end, Kevin. Maybe someone can message Kevin about that. Okay, perfect. Well, I'm just going to let Bianca explain how to place a sticky note, and then I'll go through the questions on the Jamboard. So Bianca, if you'll go over the rules here.
Yeah, I'll just provide a brief tutorial on how to use this Jamboard. On the left-hand side, you'll see this toolbar. Just press this that says sticky note, and you type in your answer. And as they come in, don't worry about moving the sticky notes. We have staff that will move them in as they come in. Please refrain from using any of the other tools on here. Another instruction is if you accidentally select this clear frame button, it will delete the entire board, and you're the only person that could undo that. So please steer clear from this button. In case you do though, make sure you hit undo. And we have 6 frames that we're working in. And I'll open them up here. The first 2 are for the first sets of questions. If this first board starts to overflow with sticky notes, then please start putting them on this one. And the same process goes for the other boards. If you could stay within these 6, that would be great, because I'll just show you an example. If you click forward, it adds a new board, and we want to try and prevent from more boards being added. So if you could just try and stay within those 6 frames, that would be great. If for some reason you can't access this, please let Sylvia or I know, when we can put in an answer for you for the sticky note. Sylvia, I think I got that all right. Was there anything?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Bianca. So thanks for the logistics on how to manage that. And so for the questions that we have in the Jamboard, the first green sticky note here is questions about high quality facilities for people who walk, bike, or take transit. So really just asking for your suggestions for how to update the rules to ensure that kind of planning, and anything specific you'd like to see in the rules that would make communities better for walking, cycling, and transit. So you can add your sticky note for that question on either board number 1 or number 2. And then board number 3 is asking, you know, about the different methods of prioritizing projects in transportation system plans. So anything that's important to you for considering how projects should be prioritized to be funded. And again, 2 boards on that exact same question. And then board number 4 is asking for your input on rules for electric vehicle charging. So kind of a broad question there on that concept. So we encourage you to use the next about 15 minutes here to put in your sticky notes on those 3 sets of questions, and also take a break. So if you want to take a break now or towards the end of this after you've completed the exercise, but we're just going to give some quiet time for people to provide their input in writing for the next 15 minutes. And at 3:25, we will regroup to kind of reflect on this and keep going with the agenda. And I know I said quiet time, and I'm just continuing to talk here to let you know that if you have any logistical issues, just send us a chat message, or you can just say it out loud. Like, we're still here. We're just being quiet. Or if you have any clarifying questions. But with that, go forward and populate the sticky walls. All right, and just want to let folks know we have about 3 more minutes till we'll get back together for just kind of some synthesis and to continue on our agenda. So if you haven't had a chance to answer some of the latter questions, feel free to do that. Thanks. Okay. So a lot of really great comments are coming up on these boards. Thanks so much for your thoughtful insights here. And I will kind of attempt to at least pull a few key themes from these. I know it's hard to see everything at once. And feel free to continue to add your thoughts here, but I'll just summarize a little bit and then we can kind of keep going in the agenda. So a lot of really good comments so far on, rules for better planning for bike ped transit facilities, making communities easier for kind of biking, walking, rolling, and using transit. So a number of comments on bike facilities, bike parking and separation of bike lanes, and for pedestrian and sidewalk facilities, making sure that there's lighting, separation, considering connectivity for walking, and really thinking about people with limited mobility and the aging demographics. There are a number of comments here too about transit facilities and having shelters, bike holders, making transit more friendly. Number of comments too, kind of connecting these rules to funding and also to level of service planning. It's kind of a high level summary there. And then if we go to the next set of boards, I think they're the pink ones. Yep, pink boards on project prioritization. So, what's most important to consider in prioritizing which projects are funded. A number of comments here about really prioritizing those projects in priority population areas, and also thinking and prioritizing movement of people. So thinking about people rather than vehicles. And also some comments on maybe having some threshold between projects that are more multimodal in focus versus kind of vehicle focused projects. And also there are a number of comments here kind of linking project prioritization and funding with decision making and funding decision making. And then lastly, we have some comments on input for developing rules on electric vehicle charging. So here, a number of comments that support requiring electric vehicle charging be built when parking is built, but then also others saying that the focus should be more on incentives rather than mandated EV charging. Some comments that want to focus more on bike and scooter charging in addition to electric vehicles, car vehicles. And then also a number of comments on kind of the funding piece. So who's paying for this, and is there a way to leverage state or private dollars? So just some high level comments there. And maybe just with this, I'll hand it back over to DLCD to see if there's anything you want to say about next steps on any of the rules for these topics before we kind of dive into the next piece for today's agenda. I think we can stop the share.
Yeah, so this is Bill. I don't know if Kevin, you have anything to add, but I think we're ready to jump into performance measures. Thank everybody very much for your participation. I know this is a lot to throw at you and to digest and then to react to. And I do encourage everyone to take the next couple of days to think about this, let it simmer a little bit. And then, when Ingrid sends out those that survey, that you have take the opportunity to send us some written comments, which we really appreciate. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, then let's move into the performance measures piece. And here, I think Cody will provide a presentation. And this is more of a presentation and then a brief chance for kind of clarifying Q&A and wanting to primarily look at getting your feedback in writing after today's meeting. So Cody, over to you.
Great, thank you, everyone. So Cody Meyer, planner with DLCD, and I just want to kind of give a once over on the performance measures work group that has been meeting since our last meeting of the advisory committee here. And so we had a great group of people here who met 5 times over 10 hours of meetings, really great participation, amazing discussions. It's pretty jam-packed. And what we did is that Brian Hurley and myself worked with these folks at these state agencies to kind of work with some subject matter experts and get some input on developing a bunch of different ideas for different performance measures. So we started out with like a list, I think is over 70, and that we actually like refined. And we were looking at, reducing pollution and increasing equitable outcomes as our primary goal. And what we did is bring that to this work group, and we talked about it and refined it. And we looked at, equity concerns. We looked at, is this getting to where we need to go? And then at the last meeting, we kind of did a ranking exercise to see how well are these getting to the goals. And I should say that this group is really providing input to staff and advice as we come up with concepts. And the group unanimously wanted to hear back from you all before they went any further. So we staff has put together about 20, a refined list, and we're sharing that with you. It's item number 6 in your packet. And we're also going to be sharing that with LCDC in a week or so here, and getting guidance and feedback from these 2 groups. And then we're going to convene this subgroup again to try to refine the list even further. So thanks again to all of you who participated in this. Next slide. Thank you, Bill. So the scope is, as I said, we're giving input to staff so we can come up with concepts for performance measures that would be used by cities and counties. And so, as I mentioned, it's really to report on implementation of actions to develop the climate-friendly, equitable communities. And what we really want to know is how can we assess whether plans and investments are achieving these expected outcomes, and when is course correction necessary. So it's really your basic performance management technique is you need to measure before you can manage. You kind of have to know what you're doing here. And just to clarify, we're not talking about setting performance targets in the subgroup or during the rulemaking. We're talking about coming up with the actual things to measure. And I will give an example of that in the next slide, is that we have a performance measure, and that would be, looking at aspects of an organization's performance towards achieving a goal. And then you have a performance target, which would be putting a numerical attribute towards that. So your goal might be to save more money, but your target might be saving $100 per month to save up for something. So we're talking about the actual measure itself, or the metric in this work. And then how this fits into our regional planning is going to really inform the work. And so we have these 3 levels of performance measures that were identified in the scenario planning, regional planning stuff we've been talking about so far. That we have overall regional goals. These are very outcomes-based things. They might be getting people out of cars and onto a bike or a micromobility option. And then we have local actions. So what are the things that a city or county can do within their influence that would get to that regional outcome? So if your goal is to get more folks onto bike or micromobility, a local action might be to build more bike lanes or put in the infrastructure that would facilitate that. Those 2 performance measures, I want to just stress this, they are for climate and equity. So we really tried to combine them. Some might be more climate focused, some might be more equity focused, but we really tried to make sure that we're doing this comprehensively. In the scenario planning rules, we also had this 3rd performance measure, which is equity. And that would be for cities and counties when they're working together as a region to sit down and talk with folks and come up with what success looks like for equity. And that would be for developing the scenario plan itself. So that's something that is really flexible and unique to each region, as we know that, situations are different in different contexts where this happens. So the performance measure subgroup is sitting squarely in the middle here. We're looking at local actions and tracking implementation of work. The next slide, please. So when we're talking about setting performance targets, which again, we're not going to be talking about in this rulemaking, I just want to give you a kind of high level how we would set those targets. So there's 2 tracks here. If you are doing a regional scenario plan, you would be, as a region, what are the goals we want to hit as a region? And then that would influence how high do we have to go across these local actions to get to those goals. So that's a very customizable approach. For folks that don't do a scenario plan in the near term, we have the statewide transportation strategy to guide us in setting, basically what is the level of actions that would need to occur to achieve these greenhouse gas reduction targets as a region. And so those can be used to inform these local performance targets. So you think of the regional scale is giving you a good idea of how high you need to go across these local actions to implement, and that we're going to be really tracking both of them. But I would suspect that most focus is going to be on the local implementation action performance measures. So an example of how these things work together is that on the left, you see the performance measures at a regional approach. So there's my example, is that your performance measure would be the percent of short trips taken by a bike or micromobility. To put that into a target, region might say, well, we want 23% of all trips by 2040. So that's our target, but that's a very outcomes-based thing, and you don't really have something that you do as a city to get there if that's all you're measuring. So what we would say is to translate that, one of the things, and this is a proposed performance measure, is that, okay, the performance measure would be the percent of city streets that have low stress walking and biking facilities, because we think that those are the things that get folks comfortable and safe, convenient access to the bike system. And so to put that into a target, it could be by 2040, 75% of all city streets would have low stress walking and biking facilities. So these are just some examples here. In the packet, we have a list of the performance measures drummed up by the group. And I didn't want to take this time to really go through that because it take another hour or two probably. So we really wanted to just get kind of clarifying questions and something doesn't make sense here, but we really wanted to get any kind of feedback offline so we can really put those together and bring it back to the group to talk about.
That's great. Thank you, Cody. And thank you to all the working group members for your hard work and those 10 hours of meetings and beyond, I'm sure. So
I don't know if that was just my internet, but I couldn't hear what you said.
okay. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. It does say my internet connection is unstable. I'm just opening it up to clarifying questions if anybody has anything they want to ask of Cody or of the working group. All right, I see a hand up from Emma.
Thanks. I just had a quick question on parking. It says share of workers and non-work trips in regions subject to parking fee. Is that intended to capture all trips, or why was that specific wording used for it? This is the regional performance measure for parking.
Yeah, that's a great question. So some of the regional, and you'll see in page 32 of the packet is a table that has the proposed local performance measures we're talking about and how those relate to the regional performance measures. And those regional performance measures, by and large, come out of the STS and the vision eval model that we use for the scenario planning. And so in that work, we do have the share of workers is looking at, just employment side of things. So these are, workers that are subject to parking fees. And that's something that most MPOs collect that comes straight out of the travel model data. Every 4 years, they update that. So we get that there. And then the non-work trips are also in that. And I don't know that I am qualified to answer that question as to why we're looking at the non-work trips.
All right, and we might have. Did we lose Cody, or are you still here?
Well, I'm back. It just crashed and reloaded on me. So I'm not sure how much of you heard that. I don't think I gave a very good response anyway. So those are the two things, I think, just in a nutshell, those are the two things that we are measuring in the scenario planning model.
All right, well, thank you. And I had to rejoin by phone too. I think Zoom wants us to stop meeting or something. Thank you, Cody. All right, I see a hand up from Mary Kyle. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify that as a member of the performance working group, thanks, Cody. I think you've distilled what we've talked about, but I just wanted to clarify that in the example that you gave, and it's in our RAC memo, of the relationship between regional and local outcomes, and the example was, percentage of short trips, that there is a 2040 target, but we also talked about benchmarks along the way. At least the performance work group wasn't contemplating that the outcome of this would be a 2040 target only, that there would be, for any of these, that there would be appropriate benchmarks along the way. 2030, 2035, whatever it is, might vary depending on the thing that's being strived for.
That's correct. And part of what we did in this memo was just to get everybody using consistent terminology, because there's so many different ways you can phrase things, that a benchmark might be if you said from here to 2050 and a 2050 target, but you might have interim targets, and those are called benchmarks. But we just thought this is just too confusing, so we're just going to call them all performance targets. So what's set out there in the rules on page 31 at the bottom is that we would expect to see performance target for every reporting year from now to 2050 and beyond. And so you're referring to that as a benchmark, and we're just calling that
whatever the words. You had 2040 as the years in the examples, and I don't want anyone to think that that's all there will be.
Right. Thank you for calling that out, and that is correct. Margie.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Kyle.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sorry if my comments are out of order. I'm not sure I'm fully following along. But I'll address an earlier comment. There was a comment, saying the difference between regional goals and equity goals. In the metro region, those are one and the same. Our equity goals are our regional goals. I wouldn't differentiate between the two. There might be a difference between maybe how equity applies to system-wide goals and how equity applies to safety goals, but equity is a regional goal for us. The second was people were kind of coming in and out, but there was a question on the table about why we address non-commute work trips. In our region, that's the majority of travel. So it's important to capture that. I know it's not easy to capture because it is outside the census data, but it's worth it to do the work or try to capture the modeling to capture the majority of those trips, which are in the non-commute. So those are my two comments. They were a little, out of order, but I just want to address them.
That's great. Then thank you. And I didn't mean to imply that we wouldn't have equity goals. We just had specifically called that out for the development of the regional plan, was to create, an equity framework for that plan, and to really kind of self-define what that means for each region without the agency coming in and saying, this is what it's going to be for you, and you.
Got it. That makes sense. And I think that getting that ownership and having, frankly, partners who live and work in the region, and equity representation, helping define a regional government, helping define what equity means is important. So thank you for the clarification. That makes sense to me.
Great. Thank you, Margie. I don't see any other hands up, but any other clarifying questions or thoughts on performance measures? All right. Well, and like Cody said, in the survey, DLCD will be looking for your feedback in writing, really wanting to see if everything is on the right track, and just any other thoughts and ideas that you have. So with that, I think we can move into our next steps and closing a little bit early here. So Kevin, I'll turn it over to you to see if there's anything you want to say about the upcoming meetings or next steps.
You bet. I'm happy to do that. I'm going to repeat what many have already said, which is please fill out the survey after this meeting. In particular, we're moving from concept to rules now. And so the more specific, in particular, your feedback is, the more helpful that will be to us. In particular, for our next meeting in August, we'll be bringing forward draft rules in the three areas. That was climate-friendly areas, reducing parking mandates, and limiting the use of congestion measures. So those three areas in particular, if you have specific feedback, please get it to us as part of the survey, and we will fold that into the rule drafts that you see moving forward. Thanks. This has been a great conversation. I'm not closing this out, but I just want to reiterate, this has been a really great meeting. I know it's a lot to think about, but we just really appreciate your engagement today.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for that. And the next Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting is on August 18th. And so obviously the sooner you get your comments in, the better, so that staff can think about that as they develop those draft rules. So I'm now going to turn it over to Commissioner Warren as RAC co-chair to kind of close us out at the end of our meeting today.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you everyone else for your engagement today. Really important topics, and your guidance is vital to help us to meet our climate equity goals. Our state's recent record-setting June temperatures were an urgent reminder of the need to reduce climate pollution for our benefit, for the benefit of future generations, and for the benefit of our planetary ecosystem. This work is critically important, a critically important part of that. We encourage everyone to respond to the survey. Of course, I'm going to, kind of beat it into your heads a little bit, so please do that. And as you know, staff will be drafting code language in the next 3 areas for our next upcoming meeting in August. These topics will be planning for climate-friendly areas, limiting parking mandates, and limiting the use of motor vehicle congestion standards. Specific guidance on rules in these 3 topic areas would be especially appreciated in your comments. And thanks again for your dedicated engagement with this important effort.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And just one more thing before we close, there was a question about when the next survey is going to be due so that folks can kind of juggle their time appropriately. So Bill or Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin, I don't know that we decided that 100% for sure. I think we'll probably try to give you at least a week from when that goes out. So probably a week from, I don't know, Ingrid will probably go out tomorrow, I imagine. So probably next Tuesday, I would say is probably the most likely date, but.
That sounds good to me. I wouldn't want to go any longer because we've got a lot of work to do, but yeah, I think by next Tuesday, please. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, and thank you, RAC members, for your great participation today, and see you on August 18th at the next one. Take care.